When a bourbon barrel is emptied at Buffalo Trace, it takes a pretty predictable future. It ends up on a ship, probably going to Scotland. This one didn't. About 7 years ago, I sent a cold email to a craft rum distillery in Ipswich, Massachusetts. Not to buy something, but to make an offer. And what came out of that conversation, I've been waiting 6 years to taste. This is Barrel P795, Privateer Queen's Share rum. 7 years and 6 months old, 116.4 proof, and for the last 6 years and 3 months of its life, it's been sitting in a Weller bourbon cask that I sent north. And we called it Weller's Ransom. Because that's exactly what it is. Something the bourbon gave to the barrel over 7 years, and something we spent 6 more years taking back. Here's something most bourbon drinkers don't think about. Federal law requires that bourbon be aged in new charred oak. Every time, no exceptions. Which means every bourbon barrel can only be used once for bourbon. When it's emptied, that cask has absorbed years of the distillery's character into the staves. The wood is giving something to the bourbon, and in return, the bourbon has left something in the wood. What happens next is always the same story. Buffalo Trace, or any distillery for that matter, empties thousands of barrels each year. The overwhelming majority get put into containers and sent overseas. To Scotland for Scotch maturation, to Ireland for Irish whiskey, and to the Caribbean for rum finishing. It's an anonymous commodity trade. A barrel leaves Kentucky, disappears into a container ship, and becomes one of 10,000 in a warehouse where no one knows its name. This barrel didn't take that path. This came from a Weller cask, 7 years old when we sent it north. 7 years of wheated bourbon had already worked those staves before a single drop of rum went in. What Privateer received wasn't just a used barrel. It was a barrel with a specific history and a specific character already embedded in the wood. And instead of an anonymous cask in a container, it went to a 15-person craft rum distillery in Ipswich, where the master distiller knew exactly which barrel it was, what had been in it, and, more importantly, what they were going to do with it. That's not a commodity transaction. That is a collaboration. In March of 2019, I sent a cold email to Privateer's head distiller. I'd been drinking the rum for a couple of years, and I was intrigued by the distillation process and by the fact that they used new cooperage, which is unusual for a craft operation and tells you something about how seriously they take the aging process. The group had been selecting private barrels since around 2010, and around 180 barrels by that point, mostly bourbon and rye, and after that some Armagnac from Lincoln in France. We developed a practice of sending our used casks to other distilleries to have them fill with their own product. 4 barrels to North Carolina, to a distillery in North Carolina, and 3 barrels to Buffalo Trace's Mexico operations in 2017 for tequila. I figured it was worth asking. The email was simple. Our group had used bourbon barrels. Would Privateer be interested in filling them with rum? And the answer that came back was yes. That one yes started something I didn't fully understand yet. Over the course of the relationship that followed, we made trips to Ipswich. We tasted, we picked barrels. A group of bourbon collectors fell genuinely in love with a rum craft operation, which is not something any of us had planned. And in 2019, the same year as that first email, we sent 3 casks north. All 3 the same cask type, all 3 containing Weller. 3 experiments of what a bourbon barrel could give to rum and what rum could give back. The first barrel, a 3-year-old Privateer rum that spent time in new oak, we put into the Weller cask and gave it 6 months. We called it Splice the Main Brace. It's 3.5 years old and 114 proof. That first Zoom call, the head distiller told us something I've been thinking about ever since. The barrel's arc of influence is about 3 months, and a used bourbon cask imparts much of what it's going to give in the first 90 days. We tasted the sample, and we found there was a yin and yang, first rum, then bourbon, and then rum again. The barrel spoke in the first 3 months. The rum had started to answer, and right there in what we could sample, we could taste both of them talking at the same time. We harvested that barrel. The second barrel, older rum, 2 years old, from a used rum cask. We gave it more time, approximately 3 years in a Weller cask. A deeper experiment, more integration. The knowledge from one barrel informing how long to wait. And that produced Royal Fortune, which is 5 years and 6 months and 117 proof. And then there was Barrel 3. Barrel P795 was filled on October 18th of 2018. 1 year in new oak. And then on January 22nd of 2020, the rum went into our Weller cask. And then we waited. Not passively, Andrew, the CEO at Privateer, would periodically pull samples to send to us. We'd get on Zoom, we would taste, and we would talk about what we were finding. Where the rum was, where the barrel was, what was happening between them. And every time we tasted, we made the same decision. Not yet. What we were watching across those 6 years is exactly what the head distiller had described, except extended far beyond the initial arc they had mapped. The barrel spoke first the way they said it would. Those early samples showed the bourbon influence asserting itself and the wood giving what it had to give in those first months. And then the rum pushed back. The Queen's Share found its footing, the spirit's own character. Molasses-based, copper pot distilled. Privateer's house style reasserted itself. In the middle samples, the rum was dominant, the bourbon was there, present in the background, but the rum was driving. We tasted and we talked and we still said, not yet. And then something shifted in the later samples. After 6 years, something none of us expected happened. The bourbon had exerted its influence. Not a subtle note on the finish, not a hint of oak. One of the tasters, a serious privateer enthusiast, who knows the distillery's work well, picked it up, tasted it, and called it bourbon. It's rum. That's unmistakable. But what 6 years in Weller cask produced is something that contains both things we love, bourbon and rum, in a single glass. And that's not an accident. That's something we were chasing from the beginning. And that's when we knew. Privateer pulled their official sensory profile on Barrel P795. Their notes: elderflower, fig, pear on the nose, lavender, some dried orange peel, and vanilla bean on the palate. 4 out of 5 on mouthfeel, body, and finish. And color, 2 out of 5. Lighter than you'd expect from something that had spent nearly 7 years, 7.5 years aging. Their notes are accurate. What they found is the rum, Privateer's own character, the house style, the distillate, doing what Queen's Share does. And then we tasted. About 5 weeks ago, I had 5 friends over, all of them serious Privateer enthusiasts, people who know the distillery's work intimately, people who have tasted multiple expressions over multiple years. They knew what they were tasting, the last Weller cask, the third experiment, the one we'd been watching the longest. My first impressions were cinnamon cream, very viscous, oak backbone, that had been built over years rather than months, and a finish that seriously didn't want to end. Others found black cherry, milk chocolate, cola, vanilla bean. One person said, and I keep going back to this, his first impression was that he thought it was a bourbon. Not a rum finished in a bourbon barrel, but bourbon. And that's what 6 years in a Weller cask produces. Another taster put it cleanly. Thick and chewy, red hots, and oak, and then, this is ready and any longer and it may lose some character. Every one of them noted the barrel influence immediately, not as a subtle note somewhere in the finish, but as a dominant presence that shaped the entire experience. And every one of them said the same thing. It's ready. What I find remarkable about our notes compared to Privateer's official profile is how different they are. Privateer tasted elderflower, fig, pear, lavender. We tasted cinnamon, cherry, red hots, bourbon. Same barrel, same liquid, 2 completely sensory experiences. Both are accurate. They're describing the same thing from different reference points. Privateer tasted what rum is. What we tasted is what the barrel did to it. The truth about P795 lives somewhere in between those 2 sets of notes. A New England rum that spent 6 years in conversation with a Kentucky bourbon barrel and came out speaking both languages. This is what 6 years looks like. Privateer International Single Barrel, Letter of Marquis, Queen's Share, 7 years, 6 months, 116.4 proof, matured in used whiskey. We called it Weller's Ransom. A ransom was what you paid to get something back. The Weller bourbon seasoned that cask for 7 years. When Privateer's rum went in, it took something from those staves. The oak, the char, 7 years of wheated bourbon character embedded in the wood. What came back after 6 more years was Weller's Ransom. Let's take a taste. If you could describe char as sweet, that's what I'm picking up on the nose. I still go back to my initial impression of cinnamon cream. It's got a baking spice, a creaminess to it. It is exceptionally viscous. I don't know if you can see the legs on that glass, but they are just creeping down. And the finish just keeps going on and on. There's no drop off. There's no attenuation. It just keeps strong in the back of the palate. When I taste it, it's not uniquely Weller and it's not uniquely Privateer. It's something that could only happen when these two met in the barrel for this long. A harmony between two spirits that cannot be repeated. In 2019, I sent that email to a distillery in Ipswich. I figured it was worth a shot. What came back was something I didn't expect. A genuine collaboration between a group of bourbon collectors and a craft farm operation in Ipswich that understood exactly what we were trying to do. And what came back is something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Two things we love, rum and bourbon, in the same glass. That's what happens when you think about a barrel as the beginning of the story and not the end of one. Pour thoughtfully, draw slowly, and savor the journey. See you in the next one.